Nobody was supposed to care about him. That's the uncomfortable truth. When Shedeur Sanders came off the board in the 5th round, the reaction wasn't outrage or excitement. It was silence. 5th-round quarterbacks aren't future faces of the league. They're camp bodies, insurance policies, names you learn once and forget by October, especially when they land with a franchise like the Cleveland Browns, a team already drowning in questions and quarterback what-ifs. Nothing about that moment screamed destiny. It barely whispered opportunity. That's what makes this story unsettling for a lot of people, because what happened next wasn't supposed to happen at all. By draft logic alone, Sanders should have blended into the background. A development guy, a clipboard holder, someone you mention only if things go wrong. And for most of the season, that's exactly where he stayed. Out of the spotlight, off the hot takes, quietly watching the league move at a speed most rookies never fully adjust to. No viral clips, no next big thing chatter. Just a late-round pick doing what late-round picks do, waiting. Then, the season cracked open. An injury sidelined the starter, Deion Gabriel, late in the year, and suddenly the Browns were staring at a problem they hadn't planned on solving this soon. There was no runway, no easing him in, just pressure, scrutiny, and the unspoken expectation that nothing remarkable would come of it, because historically, nothing ever does. And that's where most people thought this story would end, right there, at the edge of expectation. Instead, it started. What makes this rise fascinating isn't just that Sanders stepped in, it's that the league reacted differently once he did. Not louder, differently. There was a pause, a recalibration. Analysts didn't rush to crown him, but they didn't dismiss him either. Executives watched, brands watched, the NFL itself watched, and quietly, without announcement or explanation, a 5th-round pick began to receive something far more valuable than praise: attention. That's the part nobody prepared for, because this wasn't about box scores or highlight throws. This wasn't about winning a week or stealing a headline. What unfolded was a shift in gravity, the kind you only notice once things are already moving. Sanders didn't force himself into relevance, he didn't demand it. Somehow, it bent toward him. And the moment the league put him front and center on its biggest showcase for stars, it became clear this was no longer just a football story. It was a signal. A signal that draft position might not mean what it used to, that relevance has started to outrank resume, and that the NFL, quietly but decisively, is rewarding something far more slippery than stats. What Sanders walked into wasn't just a lineup change, it was a value change. One that's making veterans uncomfortable, brands impatient, and front offices rethink what star power actually looks like now. And the wildest part? The move that confirmed all of this didn't happen between the lines at all. The shift didn't arrive with fireworks. It arrived with a medical report. Late in the season, when margins are thinner and patience is gone, Deion Gabriel went down. No dramatic buildup, no long-term planning window, just a sudden hole at the most unforgiving position in the sport. Cleveland Browns. This wasn't a moment you engineer a story around. It was a problem that needed a body, fast. That's how doors crack open in this league, not through hype, but through chaos. The expectations were quiet and low, not because people doubted talent, but because the math didn't add up. A 5th-round rookie quarterback doesn't change a season, he survives it. He limits damage. He hands the keys back when the starter returns. That's the script everyone had already written. And if Shedeur Sanders felt that weight pressing down on him, he never showed it. What made the situation brutal wasn't just the timing, it was the lack of cushioning. No preseason experiment, no soft matchup to settle nerves. Sanders walked straight into meaningful snaps with everything under the microscope. Defensive coordinators weren't curious, they were hunting. Teammates weren't waiting to be inspired, they were waiting to see if he could hold the line. And the league wasn't rooting for a breakout, it was watching for mistakes. That's where narratives usually break. Instead of shrinking, Sanders stabilized. He didn't force miracles or chase moments. He made the right reads. He absorbed pressure without panic. He looked comfortable in situations rookies aren't supposed to look comfortable in. It wasn't flashy, and that's exactly why it landed. Coaches trust control, front offices trust composure, and once those two start paying attention, everything changes beneath the surface. This is the part fans often miss. The league doesn't need you to be loud to notice you. It needs you to be reliable when the room gets uncomfortable. Sanders wasn't auditioning for highlights. He was answering a question the Browns didn't want to ask yet. Can this guy handle it when things stop being theoretical? The answer didn't arrive in a press conference. It showed up in how the offense moved, how teammates responded, how the sideline energy shifted just enough to be felt. Not hope, not belief, recognition. And once that clicks, draft position fades fast. Because opportunity in the NFL isn't about when you're ready, it's about when the league runs out of alternatives. That injury cracked the door, but Sanders is the one who stepped through without hesitating. And as soon as he did, people higher up the chain started recalculating what they were actually looking at. And that recalculation didn't stop with football decisions, it spilled into something much bigger. The moment the Pro Bowl features went live, something felt off. Not wrong, off. The kind of off that makes people stop scrolling and look twice. Because sitting at the very front of the league's official Pro Bowl presentation wasn't a Super Bowl MVP, wasn't a decade-long franchise icon, wasn't one of the familiar faces that usually anchor NFL marketing. It was Shedeur Sanders. That decision landed louder than any stat line ever could. In past years, Pro Bowl visibility followed a predictable hierarchy. MVPs first, household names front and center, rookies, especially late-round ones, placed further down the page if they appeared at all. That wasn't accidental. It reflected how the league traditionally communicated value, experience, accolades, legacy. So when Sanders appeared ahead of names fans instinctively associate with dominance, it triggered confusion. Social media noticed instantly. Analysts paused mid-segment, and inside brand circles, alarms quietly went off.
Because that placement wasn't about football performance alone. The NFL doesn't surface players like that randomly. Every image, every ordering choice, every featured face is deliberate. And by elevating a fifth-round rookie ahead of established superstars, the league was sending a message without writing it down. They weren't rewarding production, they were spotlighting pull, attention, cultural gravity. Sanders wasn't being framed as the best quarterback in the league, he was being framed as the most relevant one in that moment. That's a massive distinction. Relevance used to follow excellence. Now, increasingly, excellence follows relevance, and Sanders had it. He was being talked about across platforms without the league having to push the conversation. He generated curiosity without controversy, clicks without chaos, and for an organization that survives on engagement, that's gold. The Pro Bowl feature wasn't a gamble, it was a reflection of what the data was already whispering. What stunned people was how unapologetic it felt. The league didn't hedge the move, they didn't ease him in alongside a veteran, they led with him. And that confidence exposed a deeper shift happening behind closed doors. Teams and leagues aren't just tracking wins and passer ratings anymore. They're tracking who moves audiences, who cuts through noise, who makes casual fans lean in. Sanders checked those boxes faster than anyone expected, and that reality rattled a lot of assumptions. Because if a rookie from Cleveland, drafted in the 5th round, could leapfrog league royalty in one of the NFL's most visible showcases, then the old ladders were already collapsing. Draft capital didn't guarantee spotlight anymore. Longevity didn't secure dominance. The economy of attention had entered the building, and Sanders was suddenly standing in the center of it. But what truly escalated this moment wasn't the placement itself, it was what came immediately after. A silent move. One image, no explanation. And that's when the conversation went from surprising to serious. The shift didn't come with a press release, it didn't come with an interview circuit or a carefully worded caption. It came quietly, almost casually, through an Instagram profile picture. One image, no explanation, and yet within hours, it changed how people talked about Shedeur Sanders entirely. The photo wasn't taken on the field, that detail matters. No helmet, No jersey, no mid-throw action shot designed to scream football player. Instead, it showed Sanders on a national broadcast, standing composed, holding the Hennessy Award on ESPN, a trophy tied not just to performance, but to status, to culture, to prestige, to legacy, and to a brand, Hennessy, that doesn't just attach itself to athletes, but to moments that signal arrival. That choice was doing more work than 1,000 words ever could. By selecting that image, Sanders wasn't highlighting what he'd just done, he was framing what he represented. The absence of a caption forced people to fill in the meaning themselves, and that's where the power was. Fans didn't just see a rookie quarterback, brand executives saw alignment, marketers saw positioning, the league saw someone who understood symbol and timing at a level most veterans never reach. And crucially, it wasn't loud. In an era where athletes rush to document everything, this restraint landed like a flex. The image didn't chase validation, it assumed it, and that assumption reframed Sanders overnight. No longer just a surprise Pro Bowl selection, now he was a cultural asset, someone operating comfortably in spaces usually reserved for established icons, not late-round rookies still proving themselves. The timing was surgical. The Pro Bowl announcement had already turned attention his way. His name was trending, his socials were being checked, and right at that peak curiosity moment, he offered a single visual that expanded the conversation far beyond football. The message wasn't, "Look at me," it was, "Understand me." And whether intentional or instinctive, that distinction is what separated him from the pack. This is where value quietly multiplies. Brands don't just look for performance, they look for people who know how to exist inside a brand ecosystem without being coached. Sanders didn't explain the photo because he didn't need to. The symbolism did the talking. Luxury, recognition, cultural resonance, all wrapped into a moment that felt earned but elevated, not aspirational, established. And just like that, his market category shifted. He wasn't being discussed as a breakout rookie anymore. He was being discussed as a partner, as someone who could carry narrative weight, not just campaign weight. Someone whose image could sit comfortably next to legacy brands without feeling forced or premature. That one photo didn't announce a deal, but it made future ones inevitable. What makes it even more effective is what he didn't do next. He didn't follow up. He didn't stack posts. He didn't explain himself to anyone. He let the silence stretch, and in that silence, anticipation grew. Because when someone at the center of attention chooses not to speak, the world leans in harder. But that image didn't exist in isolation. It wasn't a lucky snapshot. It was part of something bigger, unfolding in parallel, out of sight for most fans. While Sanders kept his public presence minimal, a different operation was quietly scaling the moment behind the scenes, and that's where the story really starts to widen. While the public version of the moment looked effortless, almost accidental, what was happening behind the scenes told a very different story. The silence on Shedeur Sanders' Instagram wasn't the absence of strategy, it was the front-facing side of one. Because while Sanders kept his public image tight and minimal, the engine driving everything forward was already running at full speed. That engine was family. Away from the spotlight, Deion Sanders Jr. was quietly turning Pro Bowl week into a rolling content series. Not random clips, not chaotic vlog footage. Structured moments, clean visuals, short bursts of access that felt exclusive without ever feeling staged. It wasn't about flooding timelines, it was about controlling rhythm, giving fans enough to feel close without breaking the mystique Sanders had deliberately built. What made it effective was how natural it felt. There was no sense of forced branding or manufactured hype, just angles most fans never see. Car rides, conversations, quiet pre-event moments, but each clip carried intention. They didn't overshare, they didn't explain, they let context do the work. And across platforms, those pieces stacked quickly. Instagram, TikTok, repost pages, the same narrative echoing outward without ever becoming repetitive. This is where most athletes fall short. They treat content like documentation. The Sanders camp treated it like storytelling. Every moment served a purpose, not to show everything,
but to suggest there was more happening just out of frame. That's what keeps people watching. It transforms a single Pro Bowl appearance into a series, a storyline, something you want to stay caught up on. And in a media landscape obsessed with bingeability, that approach is invaluable. What's striking is that this wasn't the work of a massive agency or a high-budget production team. This was an internal machine, lean, fast, instinctive. Deion Sanders Jr. understood how to frame his brother not just as an athlete, but as a central character, not a highlight machine, but a presence, someone whose moments, even quiet ones, felt worth paying attention to. That distinction matters to brands. Anyone can post clips. Very few people can curate interest without exhausting it. During Pro Bowl week, while other players were blasting content and riding the moment hard, Sanders' visibility felt controlled. You saw him everywhere without ever feeling like he was chasing the spotlight. That balance is rare, and it's exactly what separates viral relevance from sustained value. The family dynamic made it believable. There was no corporate gloss, no scripted energy, just familiarity, chemistry, trust. That trust allowed access without chaos. It allowed Sanders to stay composed in public while the story kept unfolding quietly in the background. Fans felt included. Brands saw scalability. The league saw something even more important, self-sufficiency. Because when an athlete can generate attention without being pushed, without burning out the audience, that's leverage. And the timing couldn't have been better. As this content ecosystem was expanding, the internet was still processing that Pro Bowl feature. Conversations were overlapping, visibility was compounding. Sanders didn't need to say anything because his world was speaking for him, quietly, consistently, and with purpose. But then, something shifted the tone entirely, because when his father finally addressed the moment publicly, the story stopped being about branding or strategy. It became about legacy. And that added a layer no marketing campaign could ever manufacture. When Deion Sanders finally spoke on it, the tone of the entire story changed. Up until that moment, everything surrounding Shedeur Sanders had lived in the world of momentum, branding, and modern relevance. Smart moves, perfect timing, media fluency. But Deion's response pulled the moment out of strategy and dropped it into something far more powerful: meaning. This wasn't a proud dad doing a victory lap. Deion didn't frame the Pro Bowl selection as a reward or a surprise. He framed it as confirmation, as alignment, as something that was always coming, whether people believed in it or not. And when
someone with his resume speaks that way, it lands differently. This is a man who lived the grind, who waited years before reaching milestones his son touched almost immediately. Deion didn't make that comparison out of envy or shock. He made it to underline how rare the moment actually was. Because context matters. Deion didn't make his first Pro Bowl until his third season. That wasn't a failure. That was the norm. It took time to earn recognition in an era that didn't rush validation. So when he pointed out that his son reached that stage in year one, it wasn't to hype him up. It was to place a marker in the timeline. To say, plainly, this is not normal. This is not fast-tracked favoritism. This is something different happening in real time. What elevated it further was how he chose to explain it. Instead of leaning into football analysis or legacy talk, Deion reached for something deeper. He used spiritual language, purpose-driven language, framing this achievement as part of a larger journey rather than a standalone win. And that move shifted the perception instantly. It turned a Pro Bowl nod into a chapter, a moment tied to destiny, discipline, and belief, instead of hype cycles and social metrics. That's how narratives are born. When you combine performance with story, the result sticks. Fans remember stats for a season. They remember stories for a lifetime. Deion understands that better than most because his own career has been mythologized in exactly that way. Flash, confidence, defiance. He was never just a player, he was a symbol. And in acknowledging his son publicly like this, he wasn't overshadowing him, he was handing him a narrative baton. Legacy, when done wrong, feels heavy. This didn't. Deion didn't speak as if Shedeur was riding his name. He spoke as if Shedeur had earned his own lane. The message was subtle but clear. The torch wasn't passed, it was built separately. And that distinction matters, especially in a league and media environment quick to reduce success to nepotism or optics. This framing did something branding alone never could. It grounded the rise. It gave the moment emotional weight. Suddenly, Shedeur wasn't just a rookie with momentum, he was a continuation and a divergence at the same time, a son honoring a path while carving out his own. That duality is powerful because it appeals to two instincts at once, respect for history and excitement for what's next. And once a moment reaches that level, criticism changes shape. You can debate stats, you can argue projections, but narratives are harder to dismantle, especially when they're reinforced by authenticity rather than performance. Deion wasn't selling a story, he was recognizing one. And that recognition added a layer of credibility that forced even skeptics to slow down. Because now, this wasn't just about whether Shedeur belonged on a Pro Bowl roster, it was about whether people were willing to accept that something foundational was shifting, that preparation, belief, and vision were intercepting earlier than expected, and not everyone was comfortable with that idea.
Which is why the pushback was inevitable. The celebration didn't land clean across the board. It never does when a story moves this fast. Almost immediately, the pushback arrived, coded, cautious, and familiar. Questions started floating that weren't really about football. Was the Pro Bowl selection earned? Was the spotlight organic? Or was this just another example of a famous last name doing the heavy lifting? The skepticism wasn't loud, but it was persistent. When Shedeur Sanders became the face of a Pro Bowl rollout ahead of established stars, people reached for explanations that felt comfortable. Legacy, optics, narrative over merit. The implication was subtle but clear. This didn't happen on its own. And in a league that prides itself on grind culture, that kind of doubt can stick if it goes unanswered. Here's the part that gets overlooked. Before college cameras ever found him, before NIL deals and brand talk, Sanders had choices most quarterbacks only dream about. Reports and recruiting records show offers from powerhouse programs like Georgia, Alabama, LSU, Oregon, Michigan, and Florida State. This wasn't a kid searching for relevance. This was a top-tier prospect deciding where relevance would matter most to him. He didn't choose the traditional pipeline. He chose the harder route, one that came with fewer guarantees and far more scrutiny. That decision is inconvenient for the skeptics, because you can't argue someone was handed opportunities when they deliberately turned the easiest ones down. Moving from Jackson State to Colorado wasn't a shortcut to safety, it was a gamble on vision. A bet that development, reps, and belief could outweigh brand name comfort. It was the opposite of playing it safe, and it reframed the entire last name conversation into something more uncomfortable: autonomy. The NFL noticed that long before fans did. When the injury opened the door, Sanders didn't arrive with fanfare. He arrived prepared. He didn't flash entitlement. He didn't force hero moments. He executed, under pressure, in meaningful snaps. That's how trust is built in this league, not through hype, but through reliability. Coaches don't protect legacies, they protect Sundays, and they don't elevate players unless the tape gives them cover. Criticism also missed another reality. Pro Bowl selections have never been a pure meritocracy. They're shaped by fan voting, league priorities, and attention economics. That's been true for decades. What changed here wasn't the process, it was who benefited from it. Sanders didn't rewrite the rules, he moved faster inside them. And because his visibility didn't match people's internal timelines for when rookies should matter, the backlash found oxygen. But skepticism cuts both ways. Every raised eyebrow fueled engagement. Every debate pushed his name further into the conversation. The more people questioned why he was there, the more they had to say his name. And in a league increasingly driven by relevance, that friction became part of the momentum. Whether fans were defending him or doubting him, the result was the same: attention compounded. That's the part brands understand instinctively.
From the outside, it looked like controversy.
From the inside, it looked like proof of concept. A player who could draw discussion without chaos, interest without scandal, pushback without derailment. That balance is rare, and it explains why, as the noise grew louder, the industry reaction didn't cool, it accelerated. Because skepticism didn't slow his rise, it clarified it. And once that happened, the conversation stopped being about whether Sanders belonged in the room. It became about who else needed to get in before the door closed. Once the conversation shifted from football to leverage, the tone around Shedeur Sanders changed inside rooms the public never sees. Behind closed doors, reports and industry buzz started circulating. Not confirmed deals, not signed contracts, but something just as important: positioning. Brands weren't asking if they should pay attention anymore. They were asking how fast everyone else was moving. And that's when quiet preparation turned into a race. According to people familiar with the space, there's been growing chatter around major sportswear and lifestyle brands keeping Sanders on internal shortlists. Nothing announced, nothing leaked officially, but that's exactly how early-stage bidding wars begin. Not with signatures, but with decks, strategy calls, risk assessments, everyone trying to determine whether to move now or risk paying triple later. Because this isn't a traditional endorsement profile. Brands aren't looking at Sanders and asking how many touchdowns he'll throw next season. They're asking how much space he occupies in culture. They're measuring how often his name enters conversations without paid amplification, how his image travels organically, how fans interact with his silence as much as his moments. That kind of scarcity-driven attention is something marketing departments can't manufacture, no matter how big the budget. And scarcity is the key. Most rookies oversaturate early. They post constantly. They say yes to everything. They chase visibility because visibility feels like security. Sanders did the opposite. He narrowed his output, limited access, let others talk, and that restraint recalibrated his value upward. Brands don't just want reach anymore. They want restraint paired with reach. Someone who knows when not to post, when not to explain, when to let the moment breathe. That's what gives him leverage before a single deal is signed. What really escalates this is his positioning across categories. He doesn't sit cleanly in just sports. His image threads through lifestyle, culture, and digital fluency without feeling forced. That opens doors far beyond cleats and jerseys. Beverage, apparel, tech, experiential brands. Everyone wants a foot in that ecosystem. And when multiple verticals circle the same asset, prices climb fast. Industry whispers suggest timing is the real tension. Move too early and you risk signing potential instead of proof. Move too late and you inherit a polished brand that dictates terms. Sanders is sitting right in that dangerous middle ground, where momentum is obvious but ceiling is still rising. That's where bidding wars live, not in certainty, but in upside.
And unlike most athletes, he doesn't need them to hurry. His visibility isn't dependent on paid campaigns. His family-run content engine keeps the narrative alive without outside help. He controls distribution, tone, and pacing. That independence alone shifts power. Brands can't dangle exposure if exposure already exists. They have to offer alignment, equity of voice, long-term collaboration, and that scares companies built around control. This is why execs are nervous, because Shedeur Sanders isn't walking into meetings asking for validation. He's arriving as someone who already knows his market value, someone who understands that attention compounds and silence amplifies, someone who can afford to wait while brands debate. And the longer they wait, the more expensive the conversation becomes. What started as curiosity has turned into urgency. Not panic yet, but pressure. The kind of pressure that forces legacy brands to rethink how they approach modern athletes. Because Sanders isn't just a rookie quarterback with momentum, he's a self-contained media platform operating under the NFL's umbrella. And that's not the future, that's already happening. Zoom out far enough, and it becomes obvious this was never just about one rookie, one Pro Bowl feature, or one perfectly timed Instagram image. What's unfolding around Shedeur Sanders is a preview of an economy that's already replaced the old one, even if some people are still pretending it hasn't. The rules didn't slowly evolve, they flipped. And the league is now operating in a space where athletes aren't just participants in the business, they are the business. For decades, value followed a straight line. Perform well, earn recognition, attract endorsements. Media attention came as a consequence. Now the order has inverted. Attention comes first, narrative comes second. Performance still matters, but it no longer carries the whole equation by itself. Sanders didn't exploit a loophole. He moved in sync with the reality everyone else is still catching up to. This is the new athlete economy. In this system, charisma doesn't need a press tour. Digital fluency isn't learned in training camps. Cultural relevance isn't outsourced to PR teams. Athletes who understand how to exist naturally in digital space, how to let moments land without over-explaining them, generate their own momentum. And when that momentum intersects with on-field credibility, it becomes unstoppable. That's the model Sanders fits into cleanly. He didn't wait to earn the right to matter outside the field. He built presence in parallel with performance. He treated social platforms not as megaphones, but as environments, spaces where silence can outperform saturation and timing can outweigh volume. That's why one image did more than weeks of promotion ever could. The league sees this clearly now. Teams and executives aren't just tracking throws and wins, they're tracking who can command attention without controversy, who can draw new audiences without alienating old ones, who can
Be placed front and center without explanation and still feel justified. When the NFL elevated a rookie in that Pro Bowl rollout, it wasn't a gamble, it was alignment with where fan behavior is already headed. And this isn't limited to quarterbacks. What Sanders represents is a broader shift for every athlete entering the league. The ones who understand content, narrative, and pacing from day one won't wait years to build power. They'll accumulate it early. Those who don't will find themselves productive but invisible, successful but replaceable. And in an attention economy, invisibility is the most dangerous position of all. This is why veterans are paying attention. Not because Sanders is louder, because he's quieter, because he's shown that control is more valuable than exposure, that mystique scales better than access, that branding doesn't have to be aggressive to be effective. And once athletes realize they can own their narrative without constant noise, the balance of power shifts permanently. That shift can't be rolled back. Leagues can't ignore it. Brands can't slow it down. Fans have already voted with their attention. Sanders didn't cause the change, he benefited from understanding it early. And now he's walking proof that you don't need to be drafted first to arrive first. You just need to know how the system actually works. The only real question left is how many others will figure it out before it's too late. By the time you trace every step back to the beginning, one thing becomes impossible to deny. This was never just a breakout. What looked sudden from the outside was quietly assembling long before anyone else decided to pay attention. Shedeur Sanders didn't stumble into relevance. He didn't catch a lucky wave or ride a viral moment into the spotlight. He arrived exactly when preparation, opportunity, and timing collided. That's what makes this story uncomfortable for traditionalists, because nothing about it fits the familiar arc. Late-round picks aren't supposed to reset conversations. Rookies aren't supposed to outrank MVPs in league showcases. Silence isn't supposed to outperform saturation. And yet, piece by piece, every assumption failed. Not because the system broke, but because someone understood it better than expected. The details matter here. From how he handled pressure when the door cracked open, to how he allowed others to speak while he stayed restrained, to how his family turned access into narrative without bleeding mystique, every move reinforced the same truth. This wasn't chaos dressed up as confidence, it was control.
the kind that doesn't ask permission or seek approval, the kind that makes people reevaluate rules they thought were fixed. That's why the conversation around him keeps expanding. It started with football, then it moved to branding, then to legacy. Now it sits somewhere deeper, about power, ownership, and who really shapes the league's future. Sanders didn't demand attention, he built an ecosystem that naturally pulled it toward him. And once attention settles, influence follows.
The most important part is still ahead. This wasn't a peak, it was a foundation. Everything so far has widened the floor, not capped the ceiling. The performance validated the moment validated the vision, and the vision has already forced decision-makers, brands, and fans to adjust their expectations in real time. The old blueprint hasn't just been challenged, it's been quietly replaced. So the real question isn't whether Sanders will succeed from here, it's whether the rest of the league is ready for what he represents. A generation of athletes who understand that value doesn't wait to be granted, it's built, curated, and protected. A future where one photo can tilt markets, one decision can rewrite narratives, and silence can speak louder than noise. This was never just about a Pro Bowl selection. This was a preview. And if you're paying attention, you already know, it's only getting started.